Mountain Lake PBS and Clinton Community College Center for Governance bring you this Election 2020 special, the Democratic Mayoral Debate.
Hello everyone and welcome to our debate with the three Democrats running for mayor in the city of Plattsburgh, with the upcoming Democratic primary now a little more than a week away on Tuesday, June 23rd. The candidates from left to right on your screen, Chris Rosenquest, Colin Read, and Tenzin Dorjee, will be questioned by our panel of journalists. Joe LaTemplio, editor-in-chief for the Plattsburgh Press-Republican, and Emily Russell with North Country Public Radio. We also invited you, our viewers, to use social media to send questions to ask the candidates. This is our first debate in this new COVID-19 era. As you can see, we are using social distancing with everyone at least 10 feet apart, our journalists off stage, and there is no audience. The candidates had a minute 30 to respond to questions. We begin with opening statements.
Well, first of all, thank you to Mountain Lake PBS and the team here at Clinton Community College, of which I am a proud alum and their legislative liaison. My name is Christopher Rosenquest. I'm a county legislator serving Area 9, and I'm running for the mayor of City of Plattsburgh because our city deserves a leader that has the skills, ability, and understanding that balancing a budget is just as important as creating community cohesion. I'm running because we need a leader that has the desire and the relationships to mend the division with our town, the school board, and many of the other community groups, as these divisions are creating more harm than good. I'm running because we need a mayor that's interested in including city employees and experts when making long-term plans, as well, and more importantly, when making difficult short-term decisions. As a county legislator, I've served as both the finance chair and the chair of the Economic Development and County Operations Committee. And during my 5-year tenure, I've helped obtain millions of dollars in grants for airport redevelopment and other regional economic development initiatives. I led the county to become a clean energy community, and I've saved the homes of those of our most vulnerable. I look forward to having a fact-based discussion on the issues that are important to us. So thank you again for hosting and for helping inform our voters.
Let's continue now. Mr. Dorjee.
Hello. Thank you, Mountain Lake PBS. It's good to be working with you again. I have worked with you on a year-long project before that. I thoroughly enjoyed and hope to have some more projects like that in the future. I'm a downtown businessman, have been a businessman downtown for the last 11 years. And I'm running for mayor because I believe that I can bring a different perspective to what exists right now. I've spent the last 3.5 decades, not only as a business person that you know me here in this community, but I've worked in government at the highest levels. I've worked in NGOs. I've worked in different forms and different organizations. And during these 3.5 decades, I have worked in refugee camps. I've set up refugee camps. I know how it feels to be a refugee, how it feels to be homeless, how it feels not to have the food to put on your table. I am not a career politician. I've never been one, and this is my first debate as a politician, and I do not see myself as a politician. What I bring to the table is the genuine aspiration of the people that are affected by the decisions made in the administration. And I'm hoping that I will bring a different perspective to it. Thank you.
Mr. Dorjee, thank you very much. Mr. Read.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank the public that we're in a terrible time right now with this pandemic, and I'm very glad that we've shown such vigilance in this community with wearing the masks, first city in the nation to actually have that policy. And social distancing has really made a difference, and I thank you for helping manage this crisis. You know, we're again in another great recession. Who would have thought just 10 years ago this would happen again? But I'll do what I did when I was confronted with a budget that was essentially in shambles when I took over. I fixed the budget, replenished the fund balance, repaired our bond rating to save taxpayers millions, and reduced taxes while preserving services. If Congress will just help a little bit in this COVID-19 era, I think we can continue on and doing those good things. We have other reasons to be hopeful too as well. I'm working to bring best-in-nation green power to a city-owned property to generate hundreds of jobs for our region and millions in new revenue for us and our adjoining towns. Our efforts to improve our wastewater plant and move MLD out are paying dividends now too, and I expect a developer will soon be announcing a major development on our harbor front, so be watching for that. I've advocated for a rental registry and a land bank and a return of the Saranac to its wild status. I revised policies for policing, repaired the relationships with retirees and firefighters, stopped Bitcoin blight, and restarted road building and secured our water supply. You'll see rural cities are an economic engine for the entire region. We must be creative to survive. I'll always put city residents first. To you, I pledge experience and proven leadership. I'm positively Plattsburgh and just the facts. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. We'll begin with the questions now. Our first question comes from Joe LaTemplio, and it goes first to Mr. Rosenquest.
Thank you, Tom. A lot of big issues in the city. Let's start out with a really big one that's been focus of a lot of discussion over the past year. The Downtown Revitalization Initiative, or DRI project, for Durkee Street, with Prime Development doing a 115-unit apartment complex with commercial space, parking, pedestrian walkway. Big project. It's been controversial. There's an element in town that doesn't favor it. And in fact, they've even filed a lawsuit recently. I'd like to know your thoughts on that project and if it should go forward.
Oh, great. And you know, when I first announced, that was the first thing that I said. Nobody who's going to run is going to get out from underneath of trying to answer this question. The original project that was submitted to the state was a monolithic structure. The community members and community engagement at the time said, no, we want something smaller. There was a Durkee Street Reimagined a project that came out that was a smaller scale construction, multi-phase, and smaller buildings. Whatever happened between that reimagined and now, who knows? That's still part of the reason why people are quite upset about it. I have said I am 100% support of responsible community-driven economic development. I don't believe that a 115-unit monolithic building in the heart of our downtown reflects what our community wants. I would have liked to see the Durkee Street Reimagined implementation of that project moving forward, but unfortunately it has not.
Obviously, yes, you're right. The DRI has been controversial from very on. As a matter of fact, I recall us all up at the campus at SUNY putting stickers on boards for different projects we prefer. I always liked the idea of developing down on Harborside, but that's only my personal opinion. Once you're elected mayor, you have the responsibility for living up to the promises made by your predecessors. Obviously, the grant was received by City of Plattsburgh primarily to do a project in the Durkee Street lot. And Mr. Rosenquest well knows that because he is on the committee that actually spec'd out the RFP and approved the successful contractor, a Prime Development, for that. Prime Development, to their credit, they've really tried to incorporate as much of the community values as they possibly could. But any responsible mayor understands that we have to live up to the promises that our predecessors have made. And I've been doing that. I trust the process works. It's probably not well known that the mayor doesn't really interject themselves into the decision making for the DRI. These are council decisions, not even really council decisions yet. They're still in front of boards, as you know. But I think this will be good for the community, and it has evolved quite a bit.
Thank you. Mr. Dorjee, 1:30.
I've been against this project right from the beginning when it was reimagined to what it is right now. I do not believe, the number one thing that I do not believe is that any cooperation that comes from outside is here to help revitalize our downtown. Any cooperation that comes in is always here to make money. And I feel that we are giving them that. So Prime, with the project as it stands right now, is here to make money off the residents. They are not here to revitalize our downtown. I truly believe that we do need to revitalize the downtown, but this is not the way we can go. And during the meetings, we were told that those 115 apartments would be market rate apartments, and the lowest price for a one-bedroom apartment was $1,400. Where do we have the residents to live in those places? So I am totally against it, and I do not support it. But as the mayor said, there are commitments to fulfill which I do not know. So thank you.
Mr. Dorjee, thank you. Rebuttals. Mr. Rosenquest.
Yeah, as Colin knows, I was not on a committee that selected Prime to be the developer. I was on a committee that selected the economic development consultant to analyze the RFP and then go out and implement the project with another selected developer that would respond to that project. So, point of clarification there. And as people know, the economic development consultant that I recommended the city hire, the city did not hire.
I think we're reaching near the end of this public process with regard to the DRI. The zoning board, I believe, is meeting next week, and the planning board the week after, and they'll very quickly and soon see what the decision for our locality is, and I trust that the process will work and will work out well. Certainly we all trust that whatever commitments the City of Plattsburgh makes, at whatever level, they will be followed.
If the Prime project does not go, what would you propose for developing downtown? And the question of the $10 million award from the state for the DRI, there's been talk that would not be a good thing if the city had to return that money to the state. So I'd like your thoughts on that, and what would you propose for development downtown in lieu of the Prime project?
You're absolutely correct in that the city hasn't contracted, has no relationship with Prime, the company that successfully responded to the RFP. It's a relationship between that company and Albany, the funders itself. So if that contract was not completed, you're absolutely correct. There is not a contract in its place. If for no other reason than the budget reality in Albany, but that's simply how these contracts work. Some people believe that money actually flowed to the city and then the city could simply reapportion it to something else. As you know, that's not how it works. So I think we would end up squandering ultimately our opportunity to develop a parking lot into something that's much more people-friendly than car-friendly.
Mr. Dorjee.
I've heard this time and again that there's a lot of support for the DRI project that is being proposed by Prime, but I haven't seen any documentation or anybody coming forward saying that I support this except for people in the administration. So I would like to see where that support is. And we were also told at one of the hearings, public hearings, that there is a base that would actually rent those apartment buildings. There is a market for it. I would like to see that study too. If everything was transparent and if everything was available to the public, then the public can make an informed decision. But right now, as we stand, it says one side says something, the other side says something, but it's not being supported by facts. As a downtown businessman, I know that I would love to see a year-round farmers market, and the initial plans that they had with the 44 or 45 apartment buildings out there, that was something that I supported. I felt that was like what downtown really needed, but not this humongous structure that's going to come up right now.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenquest, a minute 30.
Yeah, thank you. What should be done with that? My contacts at the state have been pretty clear that if nothing happens with the $4 million, it's pretty much going to be gone. And it's unfortunate because everybody who was involved or everybody who had a sense of what $10 million could do for our downtown, it was a great opportunity for all of us. And I think that mismanagement, not understanding how to implement this project has really costed a great opportunity for our residents and for our downtown. I don't believe, and a lot of people I've talked to don't believe that a parking lot is the best use of that space. And I would like to have gone back to the Durkee Street Reimagined project. That, because of public input, didn't appreciate the monolithic structure that was proposed. That project I would have liked to have seen gone forward in the first place.
Yeah, I want to sort of span out a little bit using the DRI, which, as we talked about, has been very contentious. Is there a lesson to be learned that the City of Plattsburgh went through with the DRI in terms of building a consensus and communicating clearly with the public? What are key takeaways from the debate that's been going on in the city for the last many number of years?
I believe the way it's being done right now, I mean, most of the people that I've spoken to believe that the city administration has not been open about what is, all the studies that have been done. And Prime is actually dictating terms right now. And if you look at all the meetings that are going on, the Prime lawyer seems to have taken over what the council can and cannot do. And that is not something that they can dictate. People's input, we've seen that in every meeting there has been inputs, but it's always been against the Prime project. I haven't seen any support for it in those meetings. So I, as a downtown business person and as a resident, would have liked to have seen a more open approach, more communication from the city administration with this project.
Mr. Rosenquest, 1:30.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of lessons learned and how can we avoid something like this in the future, in 2013 when I ran for mayor then, I called for a wholesale replacement and revision of our zoning and planning to focus a lot of our work on around our natural resources. So making sure that any development that did come into our city, we really had an understanding of how that development would impact our local natural resources and enhance them rather than take them away. So that's one thing. And I know that there is some work being done around zoning and planning. However, again, like we're seeing, it's mostly done behind closed doors, a very small community, a very small group of people making those decisions. And rather than learning the lesson of, yeah, we need to be more inclusive in government decision making. We need to be more inclusive of experts, both at the college and everywhere else that have worked on these types of issues in these kinds of revisions and planning. Then the other side of that is, again, we had a Durkee Street reimagined proposal. That was a direct result from community feedback. Again, having that happen and then turning around and essentially what occurred as to most people as being ignored, that has created a lot of these divisions and again, more litigation for the city to face.
Thank you. Mr. Read, minute 30.
I think it probably surprises most people to understand that there's been over 110 various public hearings on the DRI, most all of them having to do with the Prime project itself. The process is working. Maybe the process for city government is frustrating in general, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to show up and participate. And if you don't, you have a very little opportunity to kind of come back later on and say the process didn't work according to as you wish. Every document that has been developed at the various stages is all on the web, full transparency. Every meeting is recorded as YouTube Live. It has an opportunity for public comment. This really isn't a city council issue either. This is something that goes to independent boards and is negotiated between the contracting agency in Albany and the contractee, in this case the developer, and those boards are continuing to do their due diligence and make their recommendation, just as if Mr. Dorjee was putting up a shed in his yard. The same sort of process, although obviously a lot more rigorous. So all this information exists. There hasn't been any decisions made behind closed doors that I know of, certainly not behind my door. That's just not how the city functions or operates. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions that primarily arise because people haven't been willing to engage in a process that's established by municipal law. There's nothing in municipal law that's been violated. There's no behind closed door meetings. Everything has been out in the open. Everything is documented. Everything is available on the web. Everything is recorded. But it does require people to actually participate.
Thank you. Rebuttals?
Yeah, I mean, to
Mr.
say,
Rosenquest.
yeah, sure, to say people haven't participated or haven't been involved or haven't been reading these documents, I think it's lack of a better word, a little insulting to say, well, you should be more participatory, you should be more involved. And people have been. And again, people haven't been listened to. In terms of transparency, I don't think I would necessarily define transparency as go to the website and filter through 100 documents and look through hundreds of hours of YouTube. Again, I wouldn't consider that to be a transparent process. And then also in terms of independent boards, yes, we do have the zoning and planning board that we rely on to make these final decisions, and we'll see how that comes out.
Mr. Read, Mr. Dorjee?
As far as the boards are concerned, I'd just like to state one thing, that those boards are not, from the way that I see it, I do not find it as an independent board because those boards are all appointed members. So there is a certain ambiguity as to where the members of that board, their loyalties lie. So, I don't believe the process, as we're talking about transparency, that when you have an appointed board, that they would be that transparent as to support input from every section of the community.
And I would have to argue that as the mayor, I have to keep those boards independent. Of course, those boards are appointed by the Common Council. How else could it work? But those boards have to do their job. I do not go to planning and zoning boards. I do not have any discussions with the planning and zoning board members. It's not our position. These are independent boards and they have to function completely independently, and they are transparent. I think that they would actually be quite insulted to hear a complaint that they were somehow beholden to one side or the other in this. They do great work to do all their due diligence and hear from all the various sides, and attorneys on all sides. Individuals I haven't heard from. I've actually only met the prime developer once or twice in these last 4 years, and none of their attorneys.
We will go on to the next question, which was sent to us by social media. Previous mayors have neglected one of the most important resources our city has, the Plattsburgh City Beach. My family and friends spend much of our summer at the city beach each year. This year, the beach will sadly not be opening. This is a loss of revenue for the city as they let so much potential go to waste. I would like to know what you would do as mayor to make sure that City Beach opens next year, and what improvements you would make to our beach in years to come to truly make the most of this beautiful resource. And Mr. Rosenquest, we begin with you on this, a minute 30.
Yeah, sure. City Beach is one of the most important resources we have, not only just for generating income in terms of tourist dollars and attraction, but it's also a quality of life piece for us. A lot of people still they look at the beach as an eyesore, but really with the right investment and the right understanding of how to use that natural resource responsibly, I think it can certainly propel our community and our city forward with velocity. As we've seen over the last 3 years, there has been a history and a momentum of dismantling our rec department, which has been responsible for managing that beach. And if it were left up to me, I would go back to the Destination Master Plan. That was a thorough, well thought out, very well-formed document that lists what are the resources that we currently have, natural resources, both environmentally and historically, that we can use to create a positive economic driver as well as a positive quality of life. I would go back, revisit, reimagine, and then implement some of those items on that Destination Master Plan, which focuses a lot on the beach, focuses a lot on our historical resources, and really take a look at how do we then hyper invest into those types of resources that are going to move us forward.
Thank you, Mr. Read, a minute 30.
Yeah, I haven't actually precluded the beach not opening this year. Obviously, we have the COVID-19 struggle and the various guidelines and protocols that the governor's offered that makes it very difficult to operate a beach. But I know the Common Council is really trying to figure out some sort of pathway this year. And God help us, hopefully we can do it all next year. The beach is a wonderful asset for our community. The beach is something that is definitely economically viable, but they are still exploring ways to do that. One of the problems with opening up the beach this year, and by the way, the beach would not normally be open yet anyway. It doesn't open typically till the first day of summer, so there is still time. But because all the pools were closed in the spring, when all the lifeguards do all their training and get their certificates, there's no pool of lifeguards for either the city or, as you probably know, the town also recently closed their beaches for the exact same reason, a lack of lifeguards to staff the beaches. But we're doing whatever we can to figure out a pathway, if not this year, certainly next year. That is one of the crown jewels for the entire region, and we understand the regional responsibility. We do ask one thing, though. If there's some pathway for us to look at assets like the beach, like the rec center, like our events downtown, that at one time the entire county came and pooled the resources to put these things on. These burdens are now primarily levied only on the taxpayers of the city of Plattsburgh, even though they're great regional community benefits. And I've approached Mr. Rosenquest and the legislators and asked, please help us out with some of these things that are such an asset for our entire county. But these have been falling on deaf ears because people assume the city taxpayers will keep paying for them. And we will, and we have, but we sure would like some sharing.
Mr. Dorjee, minute 30.
When I first moved here in 2008, I'd been visiting Plattsburgh for many years prior to that. Plattsburgh was my getaway place when I was living down in New York City. And I moved here because of the beauty, the natural environment, and I found it very similar to where I grew up, where I was born and brought up, Bhutan. And that's what motivated me to move here, even though my wife and I had great jobs down in the city. But the quality of life that we have here is so much better than what we had down there. And right away, the one thing that we saw that was the difference between Burlington and here. We contemplated moving to Vermont and moving to Plattsburgh. But we liked the amount of water frontage that we had at Plattsburgh. And we've been to the beaches, we've been to the camps, and we loved it. And the one thing that struck us right from the beginning was there is room for a lot of improvement. And how we can improve this is by offering what Plattsburgh has as its natural resources. And we have natural resources to be a great place for a holiday destination. But as we see now, we don't have any plans to develop those areas where we can have people visiting and using our natural resources. So I would say, we need to have a concrete plan that actually not only takes the beach, but everything around here. And I totally agree with Mayor Read, the county and the surrounding areas could chip in to help us with that too.
I'd like to move on to an issue that's been around for decades, really. That's the city and town relationship. One issue is going back to 1992 with the Falcon Seaboard project, now known as Saranac Power Partners. A payment in lieu of taxes rendered large payments to the city for many years, which ended about 10 years ago. Since then, there's been subsequent agreement where the town received money in payments for their special assessment, or some of their special assessment districts, fire and emergency services mostly. There's as I understand it, there's litigation over that part of the deal between the city and town. So I'm wondering, I'd like an update on that, and is it worth pursuing any further?
As an update, it is still ongoing. The judge has asked us, and I fully agree, and I've actually put this olive branch out a number of times. I think this is something we could probably easily solve in an afternoon if all the parties are willing to do it. I'm certainly willing to do it, and Mr. Cashman knows I've made that offer a number of times before. We now know what happened in 2010 or so with removing what was at that time the single largest revenue source, monolithic revenue source in our entire budget, larger than the revenue we received from groups like Georgia Pacific, etc. And that ever since really put the city in a financial free fall, which we're still trying to claw ourselves out from that. But it didn't only cause great hardship for the city, it also caused great hardship for school districts, etc. The only entity that made out pretty well in 2010 was the town itself. It was essentially immune to that arrangement that people did, you were saying, behind closed doors without the city's participation and agreement at the time. But that was before my time, and it was before Mr. Cashman's time. I still think we can sort all that stuff out and figure out a pathway forward. There's so many things we have in common. We work together on a daily basis on so many projects. When we have abundant water at our dams, we've offered the town and the adjoining towns to take that water for whatever price they feel is fair, just in the spirit of cooperation. We believe there's room to collaborate. We want to develop 231 acres just to the west of town to generate, or city to generate more jobs for everybody, especially those people in the town and the adjoining towns. Ultimately, that's where many of the people will live if we can develop these properties. So we know there's so much in common that we can sit down and work these things out. I'm completely confident of that. It just requires the will to get there.
Mr. Dorjee, a minute 30.
My knowledge on the subject is not great. I know a bit about it, but generally speaking, from my life experiences, every community in this world is interdependent. Mm-hmm. And we have to have an honest, transparent conversation with every neighbor that we have. Because what happens to your neighbor is what eventually, it'll dictate the terms of what happens to you. Mm-hmm. So an honest conversation is what is needed to resolve any issue. As we have seen with this pandemic right now, what happens in that end of the world affects this end of the world. So we are a globally interdependent family. So taking that into consideration, I think an honest, transparent conversation, if people can have that conversation, there is nothing that cannot be resolved.
Mr. Dorjee, thank you. Mr. Rosenquest, a minute 30.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, of course, the city lost a significant amount of revenue with the change of agreement with the Falcon Seaboard project, and we all understood that happened before Colin's time. But what didn't happen before Colin's time and what's happened during your time is the amount of litigation that the city has been faced with, specifically with the town, or a fight with the town, annexation, Falcon Seaboard litigation. And in 2017 or 2019, the press reported that the city offered a settlement to the town. That was a while ago. And again, there just has been no update, no transparency on where that's at. And still, and I think Pat Bradley just the other day asked you how much money the city was spending in this litigation on top of now new litigation that the city is being faced with for the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition. Geographically, in terms of neighbors, yeah, geographically, Plattsburgh, the town of Plattsburgh is our only neighbor, and we're in a fight with them. And in terms of our pandemic and getting out of this pandemic, there is no reasonable understanding or sense that if we think that the city of Plattsburgh is going to get out of this on our own, I think we're being misled, and I think that's not a right way to look at it. We need partnerships, we need actual collaboration, we need shared services, and we need somebody who has the ability to make that happen. So,
rebuttals?
And with shared services, that's something that's really near and dear to my heart. With the shared services efforts that the governor's put out and through the county, we've solicited a number of opportunities to work with the county and other entities. We lend our technical services to other municipalities, including the town of Plattsburgh, when they were needed a clerk to be trained, et cetera. When other people need their sewage treatment plants to be run, we lend our expertise to them. And by the way, you might find this interesting that the taxpayer in the town of Plattsburgh that owns the most land is actually the city of Plattsburgh. One of the things we think there may be an avenue for negotiations is for us to have the same sort of treatment as the state does, the county does, the churches do, the school districts do in the town of Plattsburgh, and give the city that sort of governmental exemptness for some of the property we use to maintain water for not only us, but also the town, to put out fires at Comfort Inn, et cetera. We have avenues and variables that we can negotiate with, and that's why I'm so confident. If we could just sit down and talk, we can come up with an agreement.
This has been touched on a little bit right here. Further annexation of town property off Ruger Street and possibly Sharon Avenue. I'd like you to discuss the merits of that.
And we begin with Mr. Dorjee for this one, a minute 30.
Again, I would go back to say that my knowledge on this annexation and is very little from what I know. Again, I'll go back to the same thing again. It's having an honest conversation with our neighbors is what's most important, and I don't believe that, annexing land from somebody else or, encroaching on somebody's property just as it is personal. If we are to resolve any issues at all, we need to have a very transparent and honest conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenquest, a minute 30.
Yeah, somebody asked me once, is annexation a policy that you would implement? And I don't believe annexation is a policy. It certainly is a tool, but at the end of the day, exercising the option or the right to annex a piece of property has significant impact. And how it's being done and how we've seen it been done, there's not communication, there's not collaboration on how that impact is going to flow through. And I think I think that the whole reason why we're looking at annexing property is because we keep comparing ourselves to, say, like the town of Plattsburgh, who has a lot of developable property, and they have lots of industry and they have lots of manufacturing. And I don't think that's Plattsburgh. I don't think that's the city of Plattsburgh. We need to reinvent ourselves. We need to reimagine who we are as a community. And it might not look like high-tech manufacturing. It might not look like large-scale Norsk titaniums and Bombardier manufacturing facilities. We are more focused on the natural resources that we have. We can focus those efforts and those initiatives to developing those resources and attracting commerce here. And again, we have the resources for it. We have the mind share for it. We have the attitude for it. And again, it's just, for me, it's imagining who we are as a community and stop trying to fight with our neighbors for land grabs, because that's not helping at all.
Thank you, Mr. Read. A minute 30.
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize this as a land grab. You know, actually, the city of Plattsburgh government owns far more land in the town of Plattsburgh than in the city of Plattsburgh, primarily because the city of Plattsburgh only has 5.1 square miles of land. Small cities everywhere are not going to survive if they can't figure out some sort of economic development path to progress. But this notion of this being kind of a land grab is thinking in the small rather than the large. Ultimately, the city of Plattsburgh does not pay much on that 231 acres of land that we own just at our edge. Represents about 7% of the entire land mass in the city of Plattsburgh. So the town really isn't losing much, but let's look at what the town could gain if we could put some economic activity up there. If we could do something similar to what Moldwright does in another corner of our city, we can bring cheap power to that entity, and it'd be incredibly attractive. Developers have already been approaching us asking if they could somehow get our cheap power, and we say, we'd love to get some power to you, but we have no land to give you. If we can generate those jobs, the actual single entity that's going to benefit more isn't the city of Plattsburgh. It's going to be the town of Plattsburgh, Peru, and Beekmantown. That's where those 400 families are going to be living. It's going to increase demand for their properties. It's going to increase property tax. I did an analysis, and I shared it with Supervisor Cashman, that the economic benefits are going to flow far better to the town than any other entity, and will completely outswamp any slight loss in tax revenue in the meantime. So this is just good common sense. This is economics. This is win-win, but we have to think in the big and collaborate rather than the small. It's not what somebody's taken away from us, it's what somebody's giving to us that we really have to consider.
Thank you. Rebuttals?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that annexing property without conversation is actually supporting or collaborating. And I agree, small cities are not going to get out of this. There needs to be a partnership. And we're going to need to have a mayor that can bridge that gap with the town of Plattsburgh. And so far, as you've even said, nobody wants to talk about it with you. And that's a concern for a lot of us. That's a concern that even though you've reached out, there's not response. And I believe that a lot of that is an indication of how things have gone so far.
Mr. Read, final word?
Yeah, I think Mr. Rosenquest has no idea what conversations clearly have been had in the background. He might be hearing some things, but he doesn't have the full picture, obviously. I'm confident, like I say, that if we can just sit down, and I've asked for sessions, I've asked for mediated sessions, I've asked for facilitated sessions, I've asked for one-on-one sessions, I've asked for group sessions for us to discuss all this and work something out. I'm fully confident that reasonable minds would really come up and understand the true value of these partnerships. I have no doubt about it.
Next question from Emily Russell.
So I want to shift gears to the economy now. The coronavirus pandemic has led to a recession in the U.S. The Canadian border is closed and may stay closed at least for part of the summer, putting Plattsburgh in a real economic bind. Even before the recession, there was a debate over cost cutting here in the city, looking at the Civic Center, the Rec Center. If you, as a mayor, are forced to make major budget cuts here in Plattsburgh, would you propose eliminating one of those or increasing taxes? Or what ideas do you have for balancing a budget right now?
Yeah, we all know that getting out of this COVID-19 crisis financially is going to be a challenge. But again, we go back to what kinds of partnerships are we going to create? How are we going to manage that? We've seen responses from City Hall to slash and cut budgets and furlough and lay off employees. And again, the county did the same thing, but the county's approach was much different. It was more communicative. We worked with our union. We worked with the staff that was going to be laid off. And, you know, essentially we invited and supported volunteers to do that furlough program. Lack of that, you know, a lot of this is going to be relying on hopefully federal support if that does come through. You know, a lot of the justification for these cuts was a potential AIM payment cuts to individual municipalities, which never realized. And so it really is for us a long-term plan, and approaching this a long-term plan, not short-term, knee-jerk, reactionary decisions that are going to have a negative impact on our employees and on our community. And a lot of this has got to be a more of a regional conversation for how do we as a region get out of this.
Thank you, Mr. Read, a minute 30.
Sure, you know, the government for the city of Plattsburgh and the county are actually pretty similar size, and we ultimately ended up making the very difficult decision of furloughing about 24 of our employees. Based on the advice that the county civil service had given us. The civil service, of course, reports to Mr. Rosenquest as one of his committee charges. And you saw how we responded. We furloughed a couple of dozen people. We chose not to fill a number of positions, and then the library also made their decisions accordingly. And because we had built up a fund balance, because we'd done some very good work to make government efficient, we had the ability to do not something nearly as dramatic as the 160 some odd furloughs that the county had issued. And we did it in a fishbowl because we're required by the civil service to do it precisely in the way we did it. And but that's fine. We believe fully in transparency. But I would defy you to figure out how those decisions were made in the county. You can't find a resolution. You can't find an agenda. You can't find the recorded set of minutes. You can't find the committee that Mr. Rosenquest operates, the government operations, having these deliberations. But we did it in a transparent manner, and we're expecting to bring many of those employees back. We've already brought some of them back. We're expecting to bring more back in the coming weeks. So I think because we've done such a good job with our finances and really turning a $1.2 million deficit every year before I came along into a surplus and building up that fund balance, we've had the ability to do this with as least disruption in services and livelihoods as we possibly can.
Thank you. Mr. Dorjee, a minute 30.
As a businessman, I know how it feels to be in this current economic situation, and I do believe that, you know, it's going to be a very tough effort coming out of this. As far as the city employees, furloughing city employees, and there might be times that when, you know, it might be called for, but there is a different way, a more humane way of doing it, and that is what I would have liked to have seen the administration do, bringing the people who are affected into the conversation and see how best, you know, that the employees and the city would come out, you know, agreeing with each other rather than, you know, seeing a lot of posts on social media and disgruntled city employees. Taxation and spending seems to be a norm in this country. Where I was born and brought up, that is not a norm. We try and cut taxes as much as possible. We try and not levy taxes as much as possible. But in this country, it seems anytime you need to spend, you raise taxes. That would not be an option. I would say that, as mentioned earlier, the city is small, and we have neighbors that share our resources. So I would look at certain angles where people pay for the resources that they use.
Thank you, Mr. Dorjee. Rebuttals, Mr. Rosenquest, 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. So certainly the county HR department may have provided the city some guidance on how to process those furloughs and layoffs, but they certainly didn't advise you to make those announcements on YouTube, and they certainly didn't advise you to send out emails at 4 o'clock right before the announcement to department heads that they were going to be losing some of their staff. Civil Service, as Colin knows, reports through the personnel department, to the personnel committee, not my committee, and then also what our approach was much different. We approached the union, we approached the employees, we approached city manager, and that is how you should manage.
Mr. Read?
Actually, we were told at first by the county that we could employ furloughs and follow a similar process that the county had done. And then we were told just before we actually put it in place that no, we were required to do layoffs, and they had to be done as line items without naming individuals. So I think, Mr. Rosenquest, I'm afraid you got your facts wrong. And then after the fact, we were told, well, why don't you just do it the way the county did it? But that's one of the disadvantages of not having that department within City Hall, so we could have that regular dialogue and get right to the root of the problem. But we as in the city are required to be fully transparent. Everything we do is open meetings, is on is on YouTube, is recorded, and for the whole world to see, unlike Mr. Rosenquest's response.
So sticking with the economy, I'm curious what ideas the three of you have about generating income for the city, particularly considering the economic bind that the city is in, as well as many of its residents who have been furloughed or lost their jobs, restaurants, businesses closed down, and without that tourism revenue from Canadian visitors as well. What ideas do you have for generating revenue for the city and also providing services for city residents?
Mr. Dorjee, we begin with you. Minute 30.
I'll be very honest with you. I do not have a concrete answer to that, because from the point of view that I see as Plattsburgh as a holiday destination right now, and a lot of our income comes from that. Going forward, can we attract new businesses that are not service oriented? That is something that, again, I would not have an answer to, but that would be something to look at. What are the small scale industries that we might be able to attract to the city?
Thank you. Mr. Rosenquest, 130.
Yeah, again, we look at what resources we currently have and what we can leverage to initiate growth and development. And yeah, we as a tourist town and as a community that relies on tax dollars, sales tax dollars, we are going to suffer through this. But again, we go back to shared services. How can we reduce the expense of how we deliver our services so that we can maintain that level? How do we even invent a new conversation for working at home? A lot of people have been working at home. So how do we maintain that conversation for reducing our daily and ongoing expenses? Then again, what we're starting to see are people who have been working from home and their companies are saying, you don't need to come back to the office, but they're moving up here. And these are high-tech jobs. These are high-tech folks that work in software, that work on the web. And again, that is another industry that, when we start to compare ourselves to the town of Plattsburgh, it's not an industry that we've been tapping. It's not an industry that we've been attracting. But now is the time. Now is the time that seems prime to facilitate that and to nurture those kinds of relationships, and then not only show what kind of quality of life we have for those folks that live in that industry, but we have an abundance of office space for them as well.
Thank you, Mr. Read, 130.
I think you used the word, now's the prime time, and nice little segue. How are you going to attract people to this area if we don't have the adequate housing for them to live? You're opposed to expanding the housing to the very types of housing that people will want to come and live in. The fact is, it's very difficult to create housing in the city of Plattsburgh. Anybody who's struggled to do that for the number of years I have knows well. You use the term concrete. Yeah, we need concrete plans. We can't be just simply saying, well, natural resources here and people want to come there. We need concrete plans that are going to get ourselves out of this bind. Fortunately, we've developed over the last few years a 5 and 10 year plan so we can really look at the future and chart our path. We moved from $1.2 million deficits to surpluses by doing things very carefully financially. This isn't rainbows and moonbeams. This is actually trying to run a $63 million organization, and that requires a great level of sophistication. It requires the ability to work with bond agencies, work with state agencies, and one thing we can't do is raise taxes much. We've already got a tax rate head over shoulders above the tax rates in the other two major cities in the North Country of Watertown and Glens Falls. We're pricing ourselves out of the market. In my time, I've actually brought the level of taxes down, and it has to be brought down, and we need to create opportunities for more families to live here. But we also need more public-private partnerships. We need to figure out what those essential services people value are, and then leverage public-private partnerships to bring some of the other additional services to the population. And ultimately, though, it requires a plan. It can't be just slogans and this sort of thing. We need a plan, and we've got a plan now. We've demonstrated the financial success to pull ourselves up from the worst financial crisis in an awful long time, and we'll do it again because we have a plan, something concrete, and for that I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Rebuttals, Mr.
Sure.
Rosenquest?
And Colin, I'm not opposed to market rate development. I've seen the market analysis of the type of housing that we need. The last census said that we essentially could be in a housing crisis, and we'll see that come out again for this census. So I'm not opposed to market rate housing, and I understand that low income, and this is an agenda of mine, a legislative agenda of mine, is to focus on low income and affordable housing opportunities. But a financial plan, a 5-10 year financial plan that goes no further than crunching numbers, any one of us up here can do that, but your plan doesn't include the impact that crunching numbers has when you balance the budget on the backs of our city workers.
Final question comes from Joe Templio. Gentlemen, you get 1 minute to answer each question. We're running a little short on time. Joe, the final question.
Yeah, we'll shift to what's been happening in the news across the country recently. We've seen protests in cities across the nation, including here in Plattsburgh, regarding police practices. So basically, what would you do to ensure everyone gets fair treatment by local police and all that encompasses? 1 minute, Mr. Rosenquest.
This has been a quite an emotional topic for me because as a person of color, as a black man growing up in our community, I have experienced racism in our community, just casual racism from friends too, and it has been sensitive. There's a lot of call for defunding police. I don't think that's a measure that we need to take. I do want to acknowledge our police chief, who, without no prompting from anybody, reached out to community, did an interview online. It was a great, transparent, and authentic interview, and I really appreciate that. And I think that's what we need to see. I think that's kind of the momentum that we need to see. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. But we also need to see a responsive government as well, somebody who's available, somebody who is actually transparent and will be available to answer questions and reach out to community groups that feel disenfranchised. Short of that, I think that there just is a lot of social justice movements that we just haven't seen in a long time, and it quite frankly creates some hope.
Thank you, Mr. Read. 1 minute.
Again, getting back to concrete plans, people don't want words anymore. They want action. When we saw this occur, I sat down with my police chief and our legal counsel to figure out what we could actually do here and locally. Not after people asked us to do it, but proactively. I was working with my police chief, and we were hammering out and are ready to release a new policing policy for the city of Plattsburgh that takes into account the 8 can't wait concerns. The concern about chokeholds, the concern about de-escalation. We're putting in new types of training to de-escalate, and having all of our officers work through this for ongoing training, as well as in our academy, be able to seed that across an entire region at the same time. So people want concrete action. They're getting concrete action. You're going to see that by the time this show airs, and that's what people expect. Words are no longer relevant anymore. We need actions and deeds, actions and deeds, actions and deeds.
Mr. Dorjee, 1 minute.
As an immigrant, I've seen racism. I've lived on 3 different continents, so I've seen racism in every continent I've been to, and I have faced racism everywhere. So it's no different. Racism is not something that you're born with. Racism is learned over a period of time. The racism has no color. Here, yes, we see that people of color are being targeted, but other parts of the world, racism knows no color at all. Racism does not owe its allegiance to anybody. Racism sings to the tune that it benefits itself. So to get to the core of that, when we're talking about policing, I know that police departments in certain parts of the world have introduced conflict resolution, meditation to police officers rather than combat training. So if we have a system where we can begin with compassion and begin with sympathy, understanding people's needs, and if our police officers are trained that way, then we'll have a better society.
Gentlemen, thank you. We're going to go to closing statements now. Mr. Rosenquest, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. And again, Mountain Lake PBS and the folks here at Clinton Community College for organizing this event. And for those of you who are watching, I certainly invite you to visit my website to download my plan at rosenquestforplattsburgh.com. And as a reminder, absentee ballots are due postmarked June 23rd, and voting starts early on June 13th at 9 a.m. Our community and our country are facing an interesting time. A global pandemic that has changed the nature of our societies. Social justice movements that are quite reminiscent of the civil rights marches of my parents' time. And now, more than ever, do we need political leaders that need to be transparent, responsive, and accountable. Now is the time for leadership that will lead the charge our communities are demanding of us without personal agenda. And rather than relying on the financial doom and gloom and political rhetoric, it's really time for us to realize the future that we imagine for our city. It's time to leverage the expertise that will manage ourselves to financial stability and create an inclusive and responsive City Hall. I'm asking for your partnership so that we can create the future of Plattsburgh together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorjee. 1 minute.
As you can see, I do not go to any meetings, any debates prepared with any kind of paper. Whatever I bring to you, whatever I say to you, I say it from my core, from my heart, with all honesty. And in this time, I bring to you a different perspective. I bring to you an honest person who can work for you with all honesty and transparency. I'm not a politician. I do not see myself as a politician. I do not dance to a different tune and different tune to the audience that's in the audience that's in the room. So I am not your regular politician who will come and speak to you, and then the next day he or she is gone. So I am who I am right in front of you. You get the raw me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorjee. Mr. Read, 1 minute.
Sure, and it's actually been an honor to serve the city of Plattsburgh and share the stage with these gentlemen. Thank you very much. What I think everybody realizes is running a $60 million enterprise efficiently and sustainably is incredibly difficult in this day and age, especially from a financial perspective, but from so many other perspectives like COVID-19 as well. That's further confounded by the divisive times that we live in nationally, and that's really unfortunate. But we can't forget the hardship of our residents. We don't have the luxury to simply raise taxes on our residents who are already struggling at a rate that is quite a bit higher than other communities. We know raising taxes also raises rents, and we have a very high renter population and a high poverty rate that we're trying to battle in the city of Plattsburgh as well. You know, our city won't survive on rainbows and moonbeams. These are very difficult decisions, gut-wrenching decisions we're going to have to make right now. We need economic opportunity, we need sharing of services and sharing of costs with the county and other towns, we need greater efficiencies, we need sound and experienced management and leadership. This is what I have to offer. I have a concrete plan, and anybody who wants to contact me will see a concrete plan described to them. I have a strong record of success in turning things around. I've also demonstrated sound regional leadership during this pandemic, and I'm very proud of the citizens of Plattsburgh for doing their part. Now is not the time for wishful thinking.
Our thanks to the candidates and our partners, Clinton Community College's Center for Governance. On primary day, Tuesday, June 23rd, polls will be open in the city from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Some of the polling places for the 6 wards in the city have changed because of COVID-19. You can vote if you are a registered Democrat in the city of Plattsburgh. And for the first time this primary, there will be early voting at the Clinton County Government Center every day from Saturday, June 13th through Sunday, June 21st, including 2 evenings, Tuesday the 16th and Thursday the 18th until 8 p.m. You can find the hours on the Clinton County Board of Elections website. And the state mailed out applications for absentee ballots to every registered Democrat in the city of Plattsburgh. You need to mail that application to the Board of Elections and have it postmarked by June 16th to ensure that you then get mailed the absentee ballot that then needs to be postmarked by June 23rd to be counted. As of this week, more than 1,100 absentee ballots have been sent out. If you're a registered Democrat in the city of Plattsburgh, do your part and vote in the primary on Tuesday, June 23rd. For all of us here at Mountain Lake PBS, I'm Tom Halleck. Thanks for watching this Election 2020 special. We'll see you back here next